Okay, we are live. Hi, everybody. This is Steve, Sapdowski, publisher by Buzz.com. Today we're going to be talking Memo, the Republican House Intelligence Committee memo, the response by President Trump, the response by the Democrats, and we have Ron Gray and Jim Brown with us, and so fireworks are going to happen, and let's get it going. Actually, I'm joking about that. So, hey guys, how y'all doing?
We're doing great, yeah.
Jim?
I don't expect fireworks, but Jim and I might have to disagree on a thing or two.
I don't know why. Who could possibly disagree with me? I'm just a purveyor of the facts.
That's right.
Okay, so let's get it started. Jim, why don't you, if you don't mind, give just a quick background in terms of what do you think happened relative to the memo and where we are today at this point. Jim, can you hear me?
Jim? Maybe we lost sound.
Jim, we lost you? Hello? I don't know what happened to Jim. Jim, are you there? Okay, so Rana, Jim's going to come back. I don't know what happened, but so why don't you go ahead and just give us an overview in terms of what you think we're looking at this point in time in terms of memo, and Jim will be back, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Sure, yeah, I think he's going to rejoin. Steve, it seems like you can't go anywhere since Friday when the memo was released without hearing about it. It's on every radio talk show. It's on every television Sunday news show. It was just everywhere. A lot of hysteria, I think, on both sides. But there comes Jim.
I apologize to you guys. I must have some technical difficulties from this end, so I'm back.
We wanted you to start us off with your thoughts on it. We were just kind of starting to talk about it whenever you came back on.
Well, let me give you my perspective. I guess we're talking about the House Intelligence Committee that released a very controversial memo that got widespread coverage in the news, and just what the effect of that is. The law is very clear in terms of what the House Intelligence Committee was looking at. There's a basic premise that the FBI any American who is possibly involved through allegations of a crime involving a foreign government or someone on a foreign basis, without going to something called the FISA court. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. It's a secret court. You don't know much about the court, but they're set up to have to give the FBI permission if they're going to undertake such wiretaps. So apparently the FBI felt it was necessary to try to get such a warrant to investigate a Trump advisor named Carter Page. They got the warrant, and the allegation is that the information they gave the FISA court, number one, was not complete. Number two, was prepared by and paid for by this fellow Page, but he was receiving money from both the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign. So now that doesn't mean that the warrant shouldn't have been issued if the information was solid. But the allegations are that the FBI did not inform the FISA court about this. They tainted their request by giving a colored picture, didn't tell the FISA court all the information. And so, well, as I say, maybe there was justification for the warrant. We just don't know. We don't know the internal workings of the FISA court or some of the documents to the FISA court. But the House Intelligence Committee investigated, and in their determination, felt like that the FISA court had been misled, and it was an effort on the part of the FBI to basically undermine someone who had a relationship with the Trump campaign. And so the House Intelligence Committee, the majority made up of Republicans, issued a memo summarizing their thoughts. The memo according to the FBI, was going to be a terrible compromise of national security and should not be released because it would undermine our national security. Well, over the FBI's objections, the House Intelligence Committee released the report. And quite frankly, it was kind of a dud. There was no compromise of national security. That was a bunch of hogwash on the part of the FBI. On the other hand, there was no smoking gun there, too. There were these allegations that had some substantiation, some unsubstantiation. So my view of it is that the House Intelligence Committee was playing a little politics to undermine the FBI, who they thought were involved in an overreach. The FBI way overreacted by saying, oh, this is terrible, that this is going to compromise national security. There was nothing in there that really was all that confidential, in my opinion, and it should have been laid out to the public. You know, it kind of brought up, and I wrote about this last week, about that movie A Few Good Men, where Jack Nicholson says, do you want the truth? And Tom Cruise says, yes, I want the truth. And Jack Nicholson says, you can't handle the truth. Well, someone needs to tell the FBI that we as Americans can handle the truth. I recognize, and I think we all recognize, there might be some very sensitive data that might put someone in danger or might undercut a federal investigation. None of this happened in this case. So it was an overreach on the part of the House Intelligence Committee, in my opinion, and definitely a Chicken Little from the FBI. The sky's falling, the sky's falling. You're going to undermine our whole effort in terms of national security. That was bunk. There was nothing to that at all. And so as a consequence, the Wall Street Journal today, and the Wall Street Journal is conservative, but they're no right-wing, off-the-wall paper. It's got more readers than does the New York Times. And here's what they said. They said the FBI got fooled by a source, or it knew the source was lying, or it didn't bother to check, or it was too incompetent to see the obvious. Take your pick. None of the possibilities looks good. So I think it was way overreach on the part of the FBI. They got some problems right now, folks. Look, and maybe some people who are watching this want to bury their heads in the sand, but the FBI is immersed in a variety of problems, some caused by Donald Trump, some caused by their own making. Here's the front page of the New York Times yesterday. This is the front page lead story. Lead story in the New York Times. Molested as FBI, molested. This is involving this Lawrence Nassar guy who was sentenced to what, 40 to 100 years. Kids were molested. The FBI started to investigate, and while they're investigating and dragging their feet, 27 girls get molested by this guy. 27 in 1 year, because the FBI, according to the New York Times, was dragging their feet. These guys got a huge image problem. I'll say one more thing, then I'll let you guys chime in. Here's a new poll that came out just yesterday saying that half of Americans have a bad opinion, unfavorable opinion of the FBI. 50% of Americans. That's stunning. That's stunning to me, because the FBI should be our premier law enforcement facility that looks out for us as Americans. And half of the American citizens don't feel that way. So there's my summary of it. And let me say one final thing if I can. I don't come from any bias or opinion. I don't like the Democrats. I don't like the Republicans. I'll tell you right now, I did not vote for Donald Trump, and I did not vote for Hillary Clinton. I'm an independent, and I don't like any of them. I don't trust any of them. The whole bunch, including the FBI, has got massive problems that stink. So it needs to be cleaned up, but it needs to be done so in a responsible way. And I don't like the fact that Congress is playing politics for the whole thing, where the House committee shouldn't have released a memo, shouldn't have prepared a memo. That was done to undermine, to some degree, the whole Trump problem. But that's a separate issue. The fact remains that it was a lot of smoke and mirrors signifying not a heck of a lot. That's my summary. I'll turn it to you.
Okay, so Ron, let me just mention that I'm looking at your Facebook page, and I do see that Lisa Noble said not the committee, the Republicans. So, Ron, your take.
I'm not sure which part of Jim's comments she was commenting on at that point, but I agree with much of what Jim has said, and I do think that the FBI has an image problem. I like full disclosure of everything. So I say release that memo, release the Democrats' memo, release the application for the surveillance when that can be released. Why would we not, having now mired ourselves in controversy, just put it all out there and let the people decide? If in fact, as we're hearing, the dossier, the Steele dossier, was not the primary reason that the FISA court gave the warrant, then why not put everything out there that was, so we can clear this up? What's interesting is the FBI has an image problem because just last year, all the Democrats were upset with them because they believed that they, more than anyone else, helped elect Donald Trump by coming with a late investigation of Hillary Clinton. You can agree with that, you can disagree with that, but a lot of Democrats were angry with the FBI. Now we fast forward and we've got the Republicans, the Law and Order Party, attacking them. And it's kind of unprecedented that they would go at them as hard as they have on, being politically corrupt and all the way to the top. I think, yes, there's been some terrible mistakes made by the FBI, and there's probably been terrible mistakes made by the FBI all over the country. But Jim's right. You gotta settle this thing down. I mean, they are our premier law enforcement agency, and we've got a president who now today gave a speech and said the Democrats are guilty of treason because they didn't clap for him at the State of the Union address. And we're talking about whether or not a foreign adversary interfered in our election. I am glad to hear Trey Gowdy and others say this whole memo from Nunes really has nothing to do with the Russia investigation. But we're just living in this chaotic world, and the Dow just dropped by more points than it's ever dropped in history. And you can't hardly wrap your head around one problem before another one pops up. And I'm looking for a moment for it to settle down too.
And Steve, what's all that clapping? Trump comes out and he gets in the president of the United States, and he's sitting there clapping for himself. And a lot of the politicians do it today. If you're being praised or being introduced, you don't sit there and clap to yourself. But everybody seems to clap to themselves today. But yeah, Trump just claps and claps and claps. I can't understand that.
For himself. Yeah, that was a different twist on the State of the Union. Right. Definitely.
Now, certainly he was joking when he made that statement today. I mean, I can imagine that he could have said that with a straight face. On the other hand, he should not be making those kind of jokes at all. Assuming it was a joke. Every joke, as you know, at least we're told, has a sense of truth to it.
A little bit of truth, right. I think he probably was making a joke. He says something like, is that treason? I don't know. Is that treason? They don't want the country to be successful. And then I think in the next breath, he took credit for no NFL players kneeling for the national anthem at the Super Bowl. But I think it was his usual warm up to his speech and firing up his base with some of those things. But I think this investigation is very serious. And when you really dig into what FISA requires and the fact that 10 senior level FBI people had to sign off on whether that application went forward to the FISA court. So you'd have to now assume all 10 of them are Hillary fans. I mean, what are they? They're just inept, they're incompetent, that whole list of things that was cited. And then it goes to an independent court. And then it's been renewed on 3 separate occasions. Each 90-day interval, it has to be renewed based on new information that suggests there's reason to continue. So I'm for putting it all out there. I don't think the American people are dumb. I think we can read it all and determine for ourselves what's going on and who's at fault.
Okay, so let me actually throw something out to you, and that is that I think that in terms of the issue of whether or not there was classified information, I don't know if we know whether or not the government actually redacted any of the information that we saw. Maybe you heard something about that. I haven't heard anything about it, so we don't really know at this point in time, what was the original and what we actually got to see. I'm assuming that it was redacted, and I'm assuming that it just went from the House committee on to us.
Well, Steve, I printed it out, and you would see in it if there were redactions, they would have left that black. So I believe it was written, as you're thinking, it was written for distribution, and it probably did not have anything that had to be redacted. It just had
right. And I mean, I definitely agree with you. But here's the other point in terms of the say national security issue. This is where I disagree with a lot of people. In this case, Jim. And that is that I think that the question hasn't been, it wasn't just, okay, so if the Republicans release this, it's a whole spiral effect. None of the Democrats are saying, well, you released that, and the president said 100% without even looking at it. And so now, what else is going to be released that the Democrats are going to be presenting? And then you're talking about the application itself. So, to say that there wasn't a national security issue, I don't think is really accurate because, we're just not there yet. I know that is what is being said all over the media by all sides, but I don't think this is over. And I'm not so sure that I'm in favor. I'm going to be consistent here, try to be at least. And that is that if there is something that is, say, classified, highly classified, I'm not so sure, even if it favors, say, Democrats or, is against Donald Trump, I'm not so sure that that should be released. And so, it's a really difficult call, but, and I don't think that, I think that Trump certainly on his, there's no grounds as far as I'm concerned to say that something should not be released. The fact that he said 100% before looking at it is quite disturbing. Jim?
Well, of course, the problem is, how do you determine what should be confidential, not should be not? That's why we've got a House Oversight Committee, and if people don't like it, they vote them out of office. But there's got to be some oversight. Too often we've seen the government say, well, this is national security. We can't really release this kind of information. And we've seen with, the Ellsberg release, the Washington Post movie out right now, all these documents had to be secret. And when they turned out, no, they didn't. They needed to be released. We've seen that true with a Watergate. What happened with Watergate? National security. We can't tell you what's on these tapes. We can't give you this information. We've seen a pattern of that over the years, that the executive often hides behind the curtain or the cloak of executive privilege or national security to not fess up and let us second guess what they're doing. And so, of course, there's in some instances you got to keep secrets. I understand that. The problem is we haven't found that proper check and balance. And the House Intelligence Committee, and somebody said, well, it's the Republicans. Well, they make up a majority. That's how it is until and Democrats make up a majority next time. But the House Intelligence Committee made this public. Now, should they have not done so? I'd rather they have proper oversight and lay out a very scenario of cross-examining these folks and giving us that check and balance. We don't seem to have it right now. You don't want to release everything, but what are the guidelines? I don't know what they are, and unfortunately, I don't think most Americans are, to see what should be released and not should be released. Right now, we don't have that balance.
Let's see. Ryan?
No, I agree with him, and I think that I'm gonna go back to my suggestion is release more than not. It's definitely true the FBI likes to hold everything tight and not release anything, and they've got a system here that allows them to not release it. Well, sometimes that very much works against the public interest, and sometimes it works for the public interest. I'm not sure it starts a spiral of now every FISA warrant's going to be called into question, I'm not sure that happens. Because as I mentioned, 10 people in the FBI, 10 senior people have to sign off on this before it even goes to them, and they're supposed to be objective. So I think the process there, but we've got so much chaos, and the somebody's got to clean it up. You know, this whole idea of a senior FBI official and an FBI attorney having an affair, and tens of thousands of text messages now part of the public record, and all of their gossipy pillow talk, and Andrew McCabe and his wife, who certainly has a right to run for office and accept contributions, but they've pulled that into this, her campaign into his world. It's too much chaos there in that agency now. And it lost a lot of respect when a lot of people got mad about the Hillary Clinton late investigation that she believes derailed her campaign. So at the very least, you have her followers believing Comey tanked her campaign. And now you've got the new administration attacking them, and you've got the hardcore Trump supporters believing the FBI is a mess. So I'm surprised, Jim, there's 50% who think they're doing a good job. I think it just speaks to the history of the agency being somewhat solid in the past.
I think you said that very well, Ron. I mean, this has kind of been a building scenario, because this is not some right-wing or left-wing group that's just plummeting the FBI. There's a cross-section of Americans that have some deep concerns. And I don't think James Comey, you know, he's still working with Mueller on the special prosecutor's office. He comes out this week and says, well, it's nothing but weasels and liars. That was his term, weasels and liars. Well, Comey doesn't help the situation by incendiarily saying that kind of thing, because who are the weasels and the liars? Is Donald Trump a weasel and a liar? And you know, it just builds and builds. They're not going to restore any reputation like that. And Steve, let me keep going on this. Let's just don't say this is a few off the cart folks in the FBI. I can sit here, if you want to stay here for the next 3 hours, and talk about Louisiana. Let's talk about Louisiana. Let's talk about the fact, when you talk about hiding information, that for years, lawyers tried to get the FBI file involving a guy named Dan Bright. The FBI had in their file the name of the guy that was pegged as the actual killer, and they fought tooth and nail not to turn this over. And finally, a judge said, you got to turn it over. Dan Bright was found not guilty, completely innocent, having served 14 years on death row. And I can give you another example after example. The whole thing with Edwin Edwards, and I'm not going to rehash the Edwin Edwards case, but the Graham brothers. The FBI fought tooth and nail not to release the documents about the Graham brothers, and a federal judge says, oh, sure, that was the whole basis of the Edwards investigation, the Graham brothers tapping the Edwin Edwards phones. And the FBI agents, a series of agents, goes before a federal judge in Shreveport, Louisiana, and says, these Graham brothers have got the goods, that they have told us that bribes are paid. And the judge says, is it the brothers reliable? Oh, very, very reliable. The same FBI agents, the very same FBI agents were in federal court 3 months earlier in Houston, Texas. And the Houston judge, after hearing the Grahams, said they're the most manipulative con men and liars probably on the face of the world. That's the judge in front of these agents who 3 months later went and lied before a judge to get the warrant on Edwin Edwards. And if you want me to go, if you guys got time, I'll go for 3 or 4 hours.
No, listen, we're not going to do that.
This is Louisiana.
But yeah, but Jim, let me say this. And I have a Twitter tweet I want to put up.
Let me make one more, Steve, can I make one more point? And
sure.
We all have a good friend, Clancy Dubois, who runs a very respected newspaper, Gambit newspaper down in New Orleans. Clancy is a political consultant and has a great deal of credibility. Here's what he says about the FBI. Clancy Dubois and Gambit newspaper editorialized about this very thing. It said, if you're a public official in Louisiana, do not talk to the FBI, not under any circumstances, not even if you're innocent and have nothing to hide. Especially if you're innocent and nothing to hide, don't talk to the FBI. So I don't want to say this is just a little local one example of a little thing happening in Washington, D.C. I can go on and on about what's happening right here in Louisiana. It ought to concern every one of the viewers of this show and every one of the citizens in this state.
Well, the thing is that I think what we're doing, and I'm not dismissing what you're saying, and I'm sorry, in terms of personal experience, I certainly wouldn't want it to happen to me or a family member or a friend or anything of that nature. I think, though, what we're doing is that we are destroying the reputation of the FBI, or hurting it so bad, and I think it's being done for the purpose, in terms of currently, I think it's being done by some to protect the president, and I do believe that the president is doing it himself for the purpose of protecting himself. And that is a very sorry situation. If you look at his tweet yesterday that came out, I mean, basically, he told it as it is, in my view. And that is that, he's trying to say that, he's been vindicated by the memo. Well, everybody knows, just about everybody, I should say, that the memo didn't vindicate him. There are a lot of other issues out there. But why did he bring that up? And I can only think that the reason why he brought it up, quite frankly, is because he was using this to try to vindicate himself for the entire probe. So here's a tweet I just put up, and the audience gets to see the tweet. It's from Daniel Dale. Trump apparently about the memo in the middle of a tax speech. Did we catch them in the act or what? Oh, did we catch them in the act? They are very embarrassed. They never thought they were going to get caught. We caught them. It's so much fun. It's like a great sleuth. Your thoughts?
Well, first, go ahead.
I'm sorry, was Daniel referring that we caught them?
Trump. He was quoting Trump, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, he was. I think the memo was overplayed. Like I say, I think it was a wet fish. I did kind of, where's the beef? The FBI got egg in their face by saying this is going to compromise national security by releasing this 3-page memo. It didn't, and Trump did not help himself at all with the memo. Didn't throw any aspirations or give him any support at all. So it wasn't all that big a deal. It's kind of a deflated story, quite frankly. And to some degree, it is. If you look at the more cross section of more moderate news, they've moved on. They wonder why Tom Brady could throw 500 yards and still not win the Super Bowl. And they're talking about obviously the stock market and other things. It takes it. That's all. But
Trump is ratcheting up the rhetoric today on this same subject. He's gone on the attack. You're right. I think you're right. The world, the country, a lot of people have moved on. But Trump has gone on the attack now against little Adam Schiff. He's insulting the ranking minority member there, attacking him. Actually ends his tweet with, must be stopped. Almost like a little threat that they got. We now followers, we've got to go after Adam Schiff because he's coming with another memo. And then Eric Trump does not help by calling the memo sweet revenge. He tweeted that out over the weekend. They keep inciting it. I think you're right. People want to move on. They saw it for what it was, but it keeps getting ratcheted up.
But quite frankly, Steve, you're a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. If you were, there's several ways to craft a defense. Obviously, we're all talking about the fact that Donald Trump has got a major investigation going on to his campaign, some of his key operatives, and the fact that the allegations are there might be some kind of obstruction of justice. I haven't seen any Russian collusion if it's been going on for a year or so, but maybe now I think it looks like the focus is more obstruction of justice. So if you are confecting a defense to that obstruction of justice, then one of the ways you do it is beat up on those who are possibly making allegations against you. So, it may be irresponsible as the leader of the free world, but here's a guy that's in the crosshairs of of a criminal investigation. And so that's one possible defense. Steve, if you and I were advising the president, which you've got 2 or 3 defenses, and one of them is to go after the people that are accusing you. So that's nothing new. That's kind of a hallmark of taking on the prosecutors that Menendez did, the senator that just got off the hook altogether in the charges against him, Ted Stevens, and a whole host of others. So I don't think we got to quibble over the fact of how Trump is responding. I think he's responding in a way that I think he feels like he helps his defense.
But he's president of the United States, and I think that's a major difference. I mean, the whole thing is, and by the way, just put up another tweet. Basically, the House Intelligence Committee now meeting behind closed doors. Democrats on the committee expected to push for release of their memo. That's a tweet I just put up. But the overall point I was trying to make is this: that he's the president of the United States. And anybody who's, say, a lawmaker, I think, is in a heightened state in terms they have a heightened responsibility to the public. They took an oath and to the Constitution, and I think that, like right now, you heard a week ago everybody saying, well, take the fifth, take the fifth, take the fifth. Oh, don't talk, don't testify, just shut up. Well, that's the president of the United States, and yeah, he's got a constitutional right to take the fifth, or to not, or for his attorneys to tell him not to say anything or whatever. But again, I mean, we're talking about, we're sending a message to the whole world and to people in our country, and we're saying, look, if you get in the crossfire, like you said, the crosshairs, take the fifth. Okay? I mean, the biggest problem with criminal justice right now, I think I mentioned this last week, the biggest problem that we have is that we can't get witnesses. And so the president of the United States, I mean, it's okay for him to say everybody needs to be transparent, but my question is he going to be transparent? And yeah, I agree with what you're saying about if I'm his attorney, but my being his attorney, you being an attorney, is different than his being the president of the United States.
Well, maybe it is to you, Steve, but all I can say is that if I were asked about whether Donald Trump should go under oath before Robert Mueller and give testimony about this investigation, should he do so, I'd say, yeah, if you're stupid as hell, you should do so. I wouldn't even consider advising him to do something like that. For the very reason, Steve, that I just cited you. I hope you listened to what I had to say. Never talk to the FBI if you're a public official, not even if you're innocent and have nothing to hide. Especially if you're innocent and have nothing to hide. We've got example after example of overreach, of outright lying, and so I wouldn't talk to him if I were the president. I don't care who it is. Outside of being the good Lord, I don't know you could cite anybody else who would ever do anything like that. There's not a major criminal lawyer or advisor in the country who would tell Donald Trump to do, and he says he may. He says he may.
But he says he wants to testify. He says that he wants to get his story out. So, I mean, and I'm going to turn it around for a second, but, correct me if I'm wrong, but if he doesn't talk to Mueller, then he'll just be subpoenaed. And then the only thing he can do at that point is to take the fifth, if he doesn't want to talk. And then of course, it's in front of the grand jury, and there aren't any kind of conditions.
Well, no president in the history of our country has ever gone before a grand jury. Have they? I think Bill Clinton did after he went out of office. No, he never did. He actually go before a grand jury or not? I don't remember. I don't know. Can't recall a president.
No, it was. He was in the White House.
Was it a grand jury he went before? So I didn't know if that had happened or not. So I just think when all is said and done, he may submit to answering some questions. They submit questions to him. He would answer questions. You might see kind of a compromise like that. I would be very surprised. And sure, you look, Steve, of course you've got the optics, what it looks like. And I understand that. But look, if you're about the last guy that's ever worried about optics, in the history of American politics is Donald Trump. The outrageous things he says day after day, the decisions he makes. And so I don't think that optics are a real consideration to him. I think the fact that Mueller could try to nail him in some way would be of concern to him. And as a consequence, I understand what you're saying, the leader of the free world, he ought to speak up and has to answer the questions. And I don't disagree with what you're saying, that there's an orchestrated effort to undermine the efforts of the investigation by what he's saying on the FBI. That's how he's looked on his defense. Is it the right thing to do, or is it good for the country? That's something your viewers have to guess. But apparently something's working, because the approval rating of the FBI is dropping dramatically, and so maybe that's all part of his defense.
I think it is. I think that's very orchestrated, and I think even you hear his wife say, if someone hits him, he hits back 10 times harder. And the one thing he believes tainting his presidency from day one is an FBI investigation into whether or not he colluded with Russia or obstructed justice or whatever else develops. And I think his strategy is they have to be destroyed, because they're the ones standing there that are, standing between my presidency being successful. And so I think that that's all by design. We get away a little bit from the fact that Carter Page has been under FBI suspicions and on their radar since 2013. And so we have a situation where, it wasn't a new name floated out to the FBI. It was someone they very much had been looking at for their ties to Russia. The only thing that changed here was that he showed up very close to the President of the United States. So there's a lot more on Carter Page that we aren't privy to, which is why I say just put it all out there and let us just have it all. Let us decide for ourselves, sort through it, and decide who's playing games here with our future.
So Jim, I've got a question for you, Jim, and please forgive me. Apparently my mic is a little bit loud. Lisa Noble has just, Deborah Todd has just mentioned that. Lisa says the memo was not redacted and that Bill Clinton did, I think, in terms of the grand jury. But Jim, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was out today, and basically the argument is, hey, there's no crime. If there's no crime, then Carter Page should not have had a warrant against him.
Well, that follows up what Ronna just said about they're on their radar. That's one of the knocks on the FBI is that they seek out either rumors or they profile someone and say, let's dig in and try to find the crime. I don't know if there's a crime or not, Steve. We don't have that much made public about it. That's why I support Ronna's view that we, particularly in this circumstances, when defensively, if there was a crime, then defensively, instead of causing everybody weasels like Comey is doing in his tweets, that they ought to put some of this information out there to say, look, here's what we're investigating. We normally don't do this, but there's so much consternation about this kind of thing. Here's the reason we're investigating. I don't know if Page did anything wrong or not, but so far this investigation has been going on for a year, and just because Carter Page talks to the Russians, if there's no underlying treason or compromising the laws of the United States, so he's involved with the Russians in some way. There's no crime in doing business with the Russians. Donald Trump did it for years before he became president. We got to be moving towards some crime that took place, and merely discussions and even doing business with the Russians is not a crime. I think this thing has turned away from that too. It looks to me like the focus more now like on obstruction of justice, not whether a crime was committed or who's covering up the crime, something along that vein. So it looks like that's where it's moving now in terms of what the special prosecutor's office is doing. And
I don't know if there's I don't know if Anthony Scaramucci, or the Mooch as they call him, I don't know if he's back in the inner circle or not, but he made a round of television interviews on the Sunday morning talk shows. And he said exactly what Jim said earlier, that he would strongly advise him to not talk to them. He would, if he was subpoenaed, he would strongly advise take the fifth. He would look at this strictly from his standpoint of a lawyer. He would not look at this, Steve, as you and I might hope, from the standpoint of you're the president of the United States and the leader of the free world. We'd like to hear something from you. He, I think, will listen to lawyers and not respond and continue, a pretty hard assault on the FBI to clean up what he feels is unfair there. So I think that's going to be his strategy going forward.
Well, sure, that's definitely a strategy. But what about transparency? I mean, the only person who can actually testify about some of the issues is Donald Trump. And if he's going to take the fifth, or if he's not going to speak to Mueller, then he's certainly not being transparent. And so, I mean, look, I know that there's no presumption if you take the fifth. I understand that. But in the if this is being judged politically rather than in the court of law, I mean, you can't help. You cannot help but say, wait a second. You went on record to say that we should, get this, that we should release information that's highly classified. It didn't make any difference to you because you wanted to get your story out, a story that you said 100%, even though it was highly classified. But you're not willing to go in front of America, and you're not willing to be transparent.
Here would be my response, Steve. On paper, that sounds fine like anybody else, but Trump has also painted the picture that is not new in terms of where we are in this country today. You start, there's this whole sense of the deep state, if you will, I think it's referred to, where there's a shadow, not a shadow group per se, but a bureaucracy that has been there year after year after year. And if they don't like what's going on, then there's a concerted internal effort to possibly bring down the person at the top. We saw this with JFK. The whole feeling right now that the assassination, that still has a lot of legs to it, that the assassination was not done by just one person. Hell, New Orleans is the basis of a lot of that, with the annual JFK seminar along that line. Watergate. And now Trump is raising the same questions with the secret society. And I don't think there's an internal secret society, but there are ruffles within the military and a cross-section of other high-ranking bureaucrats that, if they don't like the guy in office, are not real loyal. And so Trump is playing on that, you see. And for you to say, oh, he's got to be transparent and say, I'll let anybody question me. Hey, look, that's that deep state. Those are those people that want to bring me down. They want to keep me from helping you, America. They want to help me they want to stop me from doing what I'm doing and building the wall and cutting your taxes and getting jobs. They want to undercut me because they're so mad that I defeated Hillary Clinton. That plays pretty well with a number of Americans, not a major majority, but a number of Americans, and that's Trump's base. And so I don't think his base is concerned at all that that he would not testify. I think they feel like if he testified, it's just that gang out to get him. And that's why he's maintained whatever level of popularity he has, he's maintained. And it's not dropped down, Steve. Latest polls show up around 45, 46% now. So as a consequence, I don't see any political advantage or any advantage outside of maybe you're making the argument, well, that's the best thing for the country. Well, when you're fighting an internal battle of people trying to bring you down, survival is the first rule, I guess, you deal with. So I think he'll play this deep state controversy about a deep state. FBI played into it by the lovebirds talking about the secret society to FBI agents, and all this plays into that scenario.
Having an insurance policy and all the things that have been, yeah.
I think that was just flippant saying off the top, but it plays right into what Trump is doing, you see. And he has no reason to cooperate or give them one bit of help or comment or take any oath, do anything like that at all.
Well, he can't talk about transparency anymore, that's for sure. That's what he does. So here's the last tweet, and we're going to close up real soon, but I wanted to put a pro-Trump tweet up here too. And this is from Lou Dobbs. Desperate Dems, that's what he calls Democrats, sneaky leaker Adam Schiff takes aim at real Donald Trump. House Intel Dems desperately tried to undermine bombshell Nunes memo. Guys?
Was that after the memo was released? That he said
No,
that?
it's 39 minutes ago, so I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it was after he saw.
After the memo was released.
He still calls it bombshell. I think, whether or not you liked or disliked President Obama, he said after he left office that if you watch Fox News, you live in a different world than if you listen to NPR. And I think what Jim was saying, one thing that the Trump team has been successful at this week is firing up their base. And Sean Hannity at Fox News has been very instrumental in that. And as a result, their ratings were up this past week with all of this fevered pitch toward the release of this memo. But Steve, I worry that there's not going to be anything. He's not going to go towards more transparency. He's going to continue firing up people that the FBI is stacked against him. So I don't know whose opinion we change. That's why I say throw it all out there, let us decide, because you're not going to change anyone who believes in President Trump and voted for him with the intention of him going and blowing up the government. This just feeds into what they wanted him to go do. You're not changing them. You're not going to change anyone's mind who thinks, he's the worst thing that happened to America, because everything that happens in their mind feeds into that storyline. So without more disclosure, I think we remain at gridlock. I think, sadly, that's where we stay. It's going to be a battle, I guess, for the Democrats to get their memo out. They'll probably eventually get it out because there's a lot of Republicans who believe it should be released. And then you'll have the attack on that. They'll go after, as you're already seeing. One side now is Greta Van Susteren had to go on and defend dairy farmers because Nunes is a dairy farmer. And they're like, oh my gosh, the bombshell memo was written by a dairy farmer. Well, I grew up on a dairy farm, so that gives him a lot of credibility maybe with me. But someone else is thinking, what does this man know about FISA courts?
Jim, go ahead.
Well, no, I think Ron has summed it up very well. I think at this stage, you're not going to change anybody's mind. And I don't think this whole scenario has really changed in anybody's mind. I just think it's hardened more Republicans, those who are for Trump, and maybe some that were a little, not wavering, but a little more in the middle. I think that the whole knock on the FBI has gotten to them. That's hardened that particular base. Democrats are rising up and raising their shoulders and ranting and raving. But in the scheme of things, we still have a long way to go before it really affects the politics outside of what the special prosecutor does. And I think, and I just feel like Trump has thought it was, in retrospect, wish he would have never allowed Sessions to step aside. I don't know what kind of discussion there was about that, and appoint a special prosecutor. He realized that it was a huge mistake. And I think this is just all part of the strategy of beating up on those who are beating up on you. I don't think it's going to slow down. And so we're stuck with it until the special prosecutor moves on down the line.
But like them or not, there are 39,000 employees of the FBI throughout the country. And when he took them on, he certainly took on a formidable opponent there. Even with the powers of the presidency, you see a 10-year decorated agent op-ed in the New York Times this morning resigning just because he wants to be on the outside so he can fight what he believes Trump is doing to the FBI. And as you see some agents retire and all, it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a bloody battle. If this is what he believes stands between his administration and success is the FBI, it's going to be a bloodbath.
But I think there's a component not just of his administration's success. It's also he sees there is a concentrated effort to not make him successful or unsuccessful, but to keep him in office. In other words, trying to bring him down. And so that's how he's playing it. That's how he's playing it. And I would tell you, if I were advising him and writing the scenario, right or wrong, I think it's a pretty good strategy for him, you know, because his other strategy is just to stay completely above the fray and try to be the good guy. And that's not Donald Trump. That's not how he is. He'll never do something like that. And so he's playing the hand, the cards. He's within the purview of how he's a politician, how he acts. He's playing that card that's handed to him in the way that shouldn't surprise any of us, is how Donald Trump reacts. And with that, Steve, I got to make it to the bank. I've got to go to the bank and get some money to handle all this barrage of things you're carrying on here right now. And they close in about 15 minutes. So
gotcha. Okay, listen, thank you so much. I really do appreciate both y'all attending and being on the show. I'm hoping the echoes weren't too bad. I need to get this audio fixed. It's really amazing. But listen, thank you so much. I do appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon. I'm sure there's a lot going on.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to push some buttons and say goodbye to everybody as we push these buttons and say goodbye. Oh, my Lord.